All right, for this bell work, we got what is 800% of 35. And from the lesson we saw last time, we know, and we're just going to set up a percent proportion. And since it's a percent proportion, remember percent means out of 100, meaning one of the fractions is automatically over 100. And it's the percent over 100, which is showing 800%. So I don't need to change that into a decimal. I just make it 800 over 100. And this would even be 800 hundredths, which is the same as 800 per hundred, or percent. The next thing I notice is it says the word of 35. And since it says the word of, that indicates that we're looking at the denominator, the whole of the second fraction. So I put the 35 in the denominator. The numerator is the part of that fraction, which we don't know. So this is how it sets up. And from what we saw last time, in last time's video for 9.1, there are two main methods that we talked about then. One of which was fish method. So that's the kind that I like. But if you wanted to use cross multiplication, you could. But like I said, I kind of prefer fish method. So we got four values in the proportion. It's always multiply, then divide, and it should equal whatever the unknown is, which in this case is x. I made up that x. You may use a different letter or just keep it blank if you'd like. But I like x to show an unknown value, like we have seen with solving equations. So from what we saw last time, you make the tail of the fish, which is just a straight up and down line, starting with the x, or the unknown, and it's just a straight up and down line. In this case, I go down to 35, so that's the first number I encounter there, so I put it in the first slot for the four values. And then I would cross up here to the 800. So that's the second value I encounter. So it goes in the second slot there. And then I kind of bring this back around to make the head of the fish, which is the third number I encounter, which is 100 there. And then you should always end where you start. And that should always be the unknown. So that's x. This is just a value that I can plug directly into the calculator. So that's what I will do. 35 times 800 divided by 100. Enter. And it shows me that that unknown is 280. Or in other words, what is 800% of 35? It's 280. Here's our one objective for the day. So we're still dealing with proportions, but now we're dealing with proportions word problems, which we have done in the last unit. But take 15 seconds and copy this down, please. We're still setting up proportions, and just like we've seen before, one of the main things when we set this proportion up, not just the two fraction lines that are equal, because that's what a proportion is. Two fractions that are equivalent. Really, it's two or more, because you could set this up with more fractions, but we should only be comparing two at a time. Okay, now it's usually a ratio of part to whole, but when we saw that we're dealing with percent proportions, generally speaking, this denominator here is 100 because it's out of 100, just like we talked about in the bell work. But some of these proportions that we're going to be seeing today are not percent proportions. In fact, I think all of them are. So we're not really expecting to see that percent proportion again, but it sets up the same way. Okay, so the main thing we got to remember with these word problems is they're going to give us two labels that we have to be comparing. For example, something we may compare is dollars and hours. Okay, now, with these two labels, it doesn't matter where you put them, either numerator or denominator, as long as they stay there. So right here, and again, I'm just making this up, but if I have dollars in the numerator, I would want to keep them in the numerator. Or if I have hours in the denominator, I need to keep them in the denominator for all the fractions. If I start flipping those, then we're looking at reciprocated values, and then it kind of changes the way the proportion looks. But really, if you were to take these and switch them, so if I had my dollars in the denominator and hours in the numerator, it's still okay as long as you go back and just maintain where the labels are, okay? Now, the nice thing about this is once we get the labels situated, whether it's numerator or denominator, then we look at what values they give us and just write in the numerical values that they give us here, okay? But again, it doesn't matter where they start, just as long as you maintain consistency there. So we have four major methods for solving proportions. We've seen some scale factors, I believe, in the last unit, although I don't think we really called them scale factors. We will cover scale factors in a later unit. We worked on principles of equality to solve these like they were an equation, which is okay. But last time we saw that kind of the two major methods that we focus on are either cross multiplication or Fish method. We may kind of look at a different form of what you would consider scale factors, which is really just the unit rate stuff. Okay, so one of the problems that we do today, I will show how to use the unit rate to solve it. But again, it doesn't matter which of these methods you use. Just choose one that works the best for you and then use it all the time. So I may be using a different method than what you prefer. It doesn't matter as long as you get the same answer. Okay. Now I'm not saying you have to like any of these because it is math, but hopefully you found one that works best for you. All right, so I use Fish method on the bell work. So once we get this one set up, I will use cross multiplication. All right. So for this one, again, let's just start with a proportion setup. Okay, two fraction lines that are equal. Okay, now that I have this, I want to assign where the labels will be. And what labels are we dealing with? I got dollars and I got text message. In fact, let's go and read this. It costs you $11.04 to send 92 text messages. How much would it cost to send 110 text messages? So I usually just do this in order. The first one I see, the first label I see, I'll usually put in the numerator. Okay, so that's dollars. So that's my numerator. So I have dollars in the numerator. So I will keep dollars in the numerator for both fractions. And then I see that I have text messages left. And of course, the last place I can put those is the denominator. Okay, so texts, whatever. But it's in the denominator, so I will keep the texts in the denominator. Now that I know where these go, I'm ready to start assigning the values that were given. For example, it said to start out with, it's $11.04, so I will put that in my first numerator. If you wanted to put in the second one, that's fine, as long as you associate the 92 texts that it cost with it, meaning that it needs to be in the same fraction as the $11.04. So for me, since it's my first fraction, I can put it here. All right. So that's that one fraction, but then it says how much would it cost. Okay, so it's saying we don't know how much it costs, meaning you could use a variable here, which I will do, for x. But even then, it told us it's for 110 text messages. So whether you knew that or not, they gave us a label on that second value. And so we know the 110 has to be in the denominator. It's this numerator right here that we're solving for. Okay. So this is just the setup of the proportion. Now that we have it set up, we are ready to solve it. So that's what we will do. So to start out, I will use cross multiplication on this method, right? So the first cross I see is $11.04 times the 110. It should be equal to the other cross, but we'll get to that. So in my calculator, I got 11.04 times 110, enter, and it is showing me 1,214.4. Okay, now again, it should equal the other cross, which is 92 times x, which I'm just going to show as 92x. And there's nothing to, I can't actually multiply those yet. But this is an equation right here. This is an equation that we can solve just like we solve old-fashioned regular equations, okay? So I'm going to solve it like an equation at this point with a principle of equality. It'll only take one, because the last thing I need here is to have the coefficient of x to be a 1, not 92. So the question is, how do you make a 92 a 1? Just divide it by itself. So 92 divided by 92. It's just if I do it to one side, I must do it also to the other side. So I got to take my 1,214.4 divided by 92. And if you can do that in your head, that's impressive, but I got to use a calculator. For me, it's showing 13.2. Okay, so this is kind of the end of the problem, but the last thing we need on word problems is a label for our answers. And it was asking how much would it cost, right? So that means we're dealing here with dollars, so I will label it in dollars. However, on the assignment, it'll usually say that it wants 2 decimal place values, so it shows dollars and cents. So you may have to put that 0 in there for the assignment, okay? If you put 13.2, it's possible it may give you the credit, but it may not, and in that case, you need to put the 13.20, assuming you did it right, okay? So in other words, if it cost you $11.04 to send 92 text messages, it would cost $13.20 to send 110 text messages, assuming that the ratio for sending text messages is proportional. Okay, so in the past we would have said, well, usually this big number or this one, they're either multiples or divisible by each other or the same value, and you can find that. But we can see when we start getting decimal values like this, it comes in pretty handy to have these methods, okay? And last thing here is, we don't really need the equals x. I made up the x, right? I put that into the proportion, so I don't actually need to show it equals x. All we want there is the $13.20. You drove 216 miles in 4 hours. If you continued at the same rate, how long would it take to travel 810 miles? Okay, so for this one, I'll do it twice. I'll use fish method, and then I'll show you how to do this with unit rates, because we've seen how to do it with unit rates, so it's not that it's anything new, it's just a review of what we've seen already. But if I'm going to use fish method on this one, I will need a proportion. Okay, so there's my proportion. Now, the two labels I have, the first label they gave me was miles, so I'm going to put that in my numerator. And the second label they give us here is hours. Okay, so again, for me, that means my hours are going to be in the denominator. Now, once again, just like we saw a couple slides ago, if you want to put hours in the denominator, you can. If you want to put miles in the denominator, you can, as long as you switch these. Okay, but you have to switch both, and that's the main point. So what values did they give us? It's 216 miles in 4 hours. So that's my first fraction right there. I just entered in the numerical values with the labels. Now, the next thing they say is, look, it's 810 miles. Okay, so my label for miles is in the numerator, so I just assign the 810 to that label, because that's the label that associates with it. We just don't know how long that's going to take in hours. Okay, so this sets up the proportion for us, which we are now ready to solve. You could use cross multiplication if you'd like, but for me, fish method this time, because I'm just alternating between the two. So we got 4 values in the proportion. It's always multiply, divide, and then equals. And for those of you guys that are like, I really don't like this, I'd rather use cross multiplication, do it. Again, it's not a requirement that you use a specific method. So from here, again, you always start with the x, because this is where you're going to end, because that's what it should equal. So I go up to the 810. There's the first value I encounter, so it goes in the first slot. And then I cross down to the 4. Again, I made the tail of the fish. It's just a straight up and down line. Now I'm making the body and head of the fish, so I cross down to the 4. That's the next value I encounter. It goes in the second slot. Then I can swing this back up to the top to 216 to make the head of the fish. And you see that we end where we start, which should always be at wherever the blank or the unknown value is, which is, for me, x. Well, this creates a direct calculation that I can just type into the calculator, exactly like we see it. 810 times 4 divided by 216. I push enter, and it tells me that that would be 15. Okay, now you could say it equals x, but I don't really care if it equals x because it's just 15. But the answer is not actually 15. This is where we need the labels, right? Well, we know that the unknown was in hours right here because of the way we set up our proportion. So I'm just going to take the hours label and assign it to the 15, which means here that it would take 15 hours. A grocery store sells a bag of 8 oranges for $6.64. If you spent $4.15 on oranges, how many did you buy? All right, so on this one, we have the two values, right? But let's set up our proportion first. Okay, so here's a nice proportion, very pretty. And what were the two values they gave us? It was 8 oranges for $6.64. So I'm just putting the labels on here first. Okay, so I'm going to start with my oranges. And like I said, it's the first one I encounter, so I'm just going to put oranges in the numerator. But if for some reason you're like, I'm going to put them in the denominator, no problem, you can. Okay, so if I put oranges in the numerator, it needs to stay in the numerator. That's it. And then the next value I get is dollars, right? So I'm going to put that in my denominators for both. Okay, oranges per dollars, whatever. Okay, so what were the values they gave us? Well, it was 8 oranges. they said, for $6.64, so $6.64. And later, we don't know how many oranges it's going to be, but it did tell us that it would be $4.15. Maybe this is all you got. But we have the $4.15. We got to figure out how many oranges that's going to be. So this is my setup right here. We don't know how many oranges it's going to be for $4.15. But what I can do now is solve this using whichever method you want. You can use whatever method you want. And since I used fish method on that last one, I'll use cross multiplication on this one. So the first cross I see is 8 times 4.15. It should equal the other value there, but in my calculator, 8 times 4.15, enter, I get 33.2, which would equal the other cross here, 6.64 times x. Okay, so I showed the multiplication on that one, although you wouldn't have to, but nothing to do there. So the last thing I got to do here is just solve this equation for what I have as x. So let's use the principle of equality here. Remember, the idea is that I do not want 6.64 x's. I want 1 x here in the end. So I'm going to show the division a little different with the fraction line. So 6.64 divided by 6.64 is 1. But if I do it to one side, the principle of equality says you got to do it the other side as well. So that's what I will do. And that will tell me what my 1x is. So 33.2 divided by 6.64, enter, and I get 5. Okay, now this is a word problem, so the question should be 5 what? Well, again, up here we see the x is oranges, so 5 oranges. That's it. There we go. So again, in other words, if it costs $6.64 for 8 oranges, it would cost $4.15 for 5 oranges. Here's our next one. 1 week, you earned $126 at your job when you worked for 6 hours. If you were paid the same hourly wage, how much would you make the next week if you worked 22 hours? You guys try this one. Take a minute, try this one out, and we'll go over it together as a class. So let's get started here with a proportion, setting up the two fractions that are equal, as usual. And then we can look at the labels they gave us, right? So the first label I see here, boom, dollars, okay? So I'm gonna keep my dollars in the numerators, although you could have put them in the denominators, and that would have been fine. And then the second label they give us here is hours. Okay, so I'm gonna put my hours in the denominator. And again, if you had the labels flipped, that's okay. Again, you should get the same answer either way. Okay, so we got hours in the denominators. So what values did they give us for those? Well, it's $126 for the 6 hours, right? So 126 here. And I don't really need to put the 0.00. It's just 126. You can if you'd like, okay? But that was for 6 hours of work right there. So $126 for 6 hours. And then they say, how much would you make the next week if you work 22 hours? So again, that's 22 hours. That's why I know the hours there for is 22, the numerical value. I just don't know how much money that is going to be, okay? But I can solve this. This one we use cross multiplication. This one we'll use fish method, okay? So 1, 2, 3, 4 values. Multiply, divide, equals, boom, okay? And let's go and start on with the fish here. So for my fish method, I start always with the x, and then I make the tail of the fish straight up and down. Boom, 22 is the first value I find. And I cross up here to 126. That's the second value I encounter. Then I swing it back down to the 6 to make the head of the fish. That's the third value I encounter, so it goes in the third slot. And then I finish off at the x, which is going to be in dollars, right? So I know that I can just put this into the calculator. 22 times 126 divided by 6. Enter is 462. 462 what though? Because it is a word problem. Yeah, remember up here the label for the x was in dollars. So that's what I will label it as, in dollars. And again, you may have to put a 0.00 here on the assignment. I don't really remember, but you'll find out. It may just work with the 462. Now, On the assignment, I believe you do not actually have to label any of your answers, and if you do, then it may mark it incorrect. So don't worry about labeling the answers on the assignment. However, if you ever take a written exam or a quiz or something like this with word problems, you will need to label your answers. Okay, so that's why I'm stressing the importance of that right now. Well, you can see that's a pretty quick lesson right there. I can solve proportional word problems as our objective. But you guys should have plenty of time to finish the assignment before you go home, so you don't actually have to take it home and do any of that work.